Hey demons, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor, and for today's video I am going over the book stats that I've accumulated from the beginning to the middle of this year. So kind of like a mid-year checkup. I really like looking at the stats at the end of each calendar year for my reading goals, but I thought I would implement kind of a mid-year checkup this year just to see if I am reaching, number one, like all of the goals that I wanted to do at the beginning of the year. If I do this little checkup, it will be a lot easier to correct where I'm going off course and keeping on moving in the right direction. And then number two, it will also kind of be interesting to see, looking at these stats and then looking at my end of the year stats, how maybe the first half of the year's reading changes from the next half of the year. So let's get started. So right now, as I am filming this, I'm filming this Friday, July 24th, and I have read 74 books this year so far. So I thought first we'd do a little deep dive into genres. So starting off with the genres, I'm really going to try and have some sort of graphic here for you guys to look at. But at this point in time, I have read 9 different genres, and you know, this is kind of up in the air. I kind of divided them myself. So some of the groupings, I could kind of squish them together and have less genres overall, but I really like fleshing out these. So let's go over all of the genres that I've read this year. So this year I've read 6 sci-fi books. I've read 17 fantasy books. I've read 21 horror books. I've read 9 thrillers. I've read 3 true crime books. I've read 2 books that are either historical fiction or mythology retellings. I've read 5 nonfiction books, and that's general nonfiction. I've read 5 memoirs or autobiographies, and I have read 6 contemporary novels. So looking at these, my 2 top genres are fantasy and horror. That's really standard for me. I'd say that's usually about primarily what I read. As for sci-fis and thrillers, that doesn't surprise me that they're like the next 2 genres. It does surprise me how many thrillers I've read this year, because I've kind of had it in my head that I haven't read pretty much any thrillers at all, because I have DNF'd a lot of them. I have just really not been in the mood for thrillers, whereas in the past I have read, I believe, a lot more thrillers percentage-wise. So that's interesting to see that I actually have completed quite a few thrillers, and I think that's also interesting to note that I can't actually remember more than like 2 off the top of my head that I have read, so they probably weren't that great of thrillers. Last year I just had a nonfiction category, but I wanted to see more this year what types of nonfiction I was reading, because I did end up with a really large amount of nonfiction books last year, and it really surprises me that I have as many memoir and autobiographies as I have just general like microhistories of nonfiction, because I would consider that I don't really like a lot of memoirs, but I have read a lot of interesting ones this year that are definitely a different format, so that's interesting to see. So the next stat that I have are the age range of the books that I read and who they're tailored towards. So in terms of books that I've read this year, I have read 6 middle grade books, 11 YA books, and 57 adult books. This again is fairly standard for me. I primarily read adult works. I would say I am surprised by how many middle grades that I have read, because I normally don't really read those, but it's been a trying year, so sometimes I have definitely picked up a younger leaning book just for some, you know, lighthearted relief during this year. And then what is surprising about this is I had thought that I had read a ton more YA than I normally do. By this point in the year, I was thinking that I had read so much more YA than I've ever read in the past couple of years. And while that still might be the case, I'd have to double check my previous years. Really, I haven't read that much YA in comparison to the amount of adult fiction. So I do think it is interesting. So I think maybe what happened there is I think May and June I have read more YA than I have all year. So just because those are so clustered, probably that's where I was thinking. But I was honestly anticipating more of a 50-50 split between adult and YA books. So that's really surprising. That's probably not going to change by the end of the year, honestly. I do read primarily adult fiction, but that being said, if I'm looking at my anticipated releases, I'd say it's about 60% adult fiction and 40% YA fiction. So if I get to all of those books by the end of the year, then that will add a lot more YA books to my list. The next stat that I am looking at is who is writing the books that I'm reading. And so this is going to be just in terms of authors that I have read. I'm not counting for this stat right here authors that I've read multiple times. So the total number is going to be less than the amount of books that I have read this year. In terms of authors, I have read 25 different male authors. I have read 34 different female authors, and I have read 2 authors that are on the non-binary spectrum. And again, just like a caveat, you know, this is subject to change. Gender identity is something that does change, and a lot of these, especially for less established authors, I try and do as much research as I can to try and find out correct pronouns for the authors that I am reading. So to the best of my knowledge, this is accurate. Now, between male and female, it definitely is more of like a 50-50 split, which is awesome. I've really been trying to read less male focused. This definitely isn't the case for every book in the genre, but fantasy and horror, if you think of like the big hitter names, a lot of them are male, and the ones that tend to be promoted the most are men, especially in the horror genre. So it's definitely on me, and it's not impossible to diversify reading there, but it is something that I have been working really hard on each year to improve, just to make sure that I'm getting a variety of voices. I'd really like to read more non-binary authors. I've, again, only read 2 so far this point in the year. So I'm hoping at the end of the year, this is going to look more like a pie with 3 different slices. The non-binary authors are a very small slice of that pie at the moment. And then just kind of examining the amount of authors that I have read the most from. Stephen King's on there, that's no surprise. But actually tied neck and neck for Stephen King is Marjorie Liu, and she is the author of Monstrous, a graphic novel series, and I've read 4 volumes from that this year, so that's definitely why she is appearing on there a lot. And actually the 5th volume is coming out at the end of this year, so it's definitely going to add 1 more to her name. So I anticipate she'll be one of my most read authors at the end of this year as well. And then just in terms of the year of the books that I am reading, my most popular year actually is 2020. I've read 2020 releases, which is definitely a lot higher than it has been in years past. So that's very interesting. Normally I am more of like a backlog reader. I think that definitely has to do with a lot of my favorite authors were releasing things this year. Circumstances have made libraries very hard to get to, and also secondhand bookstores very inaccessible as well. So if I'm buying books, I've noticed I've bought more new books this year, where I traditionally buy a lot more used books, which tend to be backlist titles. And then just the amount of purchases that I have used just for like a little crumb of serotonin have definitely increased this year. So kind of like those impulse buys, I have bought a lot of the books that I was anticipating for this year. So that kind of makes sense. I'm just glad that I'm actually reading the books that I'm getting. And then my next most popular year of releases that I've read from is 2019, and I've read 17 books from 2019. A lot of that has to do with I was trying to read all of the Goodreads like semi-finalists for the horror category in 2019, so that's where a lot of those come from, and then just making my way through anticipated books from last year. And then the rest of it is really all over the place. There's not, let's see, the next highest year, okay, is 2018, and then 2017, and then 2016. I'm definitely reading a lot more newer releases than I normally do, and that definitely is also an influence of BookTube. I feel like I have learned more than ever this year to find anticipated releases and find upcoming books like way before that they come out. So that's really made me start reading more current fiction. No problems with that. My guess is it's probably going to remain about the same. I've really prioritized new releases this year, and it looks like the oldest book that I have read so far this year would be 1973. I have 1 book from there, and I'm not actually going to go check, but if I had to guess, I want to say that might have been Rosemary's Baby. Again, I don't know, but that's the oldest year. So from 1973 to 2020, it's all over the place in terms of that. So that's really interesting as well. So in terms of how that fits in with my 2020 reading goals, my first goal was to read 100 books. I'm gonna hit that unless I fall into like some deeply catastrophic reading slump. Just gonna knock on wood for that. But I mean, I'm at, you know, almost 80 books right now. It shouldn't be that much harder to hit 100 books. I average out about like 10 to 12 books a month, so I should be able to hit that one. The next goal is read a nonfiction book every month. I've really been hitting that one out of the park. I've read a lot more than just 1 nonfiction book every month, so that's exciting. I'll probably try and narrow that down next year and make that a new goal, because it's definitely something that I don't have a problem problem hitting. My next goal is to read a Stephen King book every month, just so I can make my way through his very extensive list of books. I have not hit that. It says on here that I've only read 4 Stephen King books, and that's fair. I did actually start the year reading Mr. Mercedes, and that was probably my least favorite book of him that I've ever read, so that put me in a slump. And also I really have been trying to read just more diversely overall, so that's one that I'm not going to stress out too much about. But I mean, I'm trying to hit to 12 by the end of the year, and I've only read 4, so who knows if that'll happen or not. Those are really like my set ones. I did want to read more diversely as a goal, so I didn't numerize that at all. So depending on how you're looking at it, I have started branching out. I had thought about maybe logging different things such as like sexualities of authors and also ethnicities of authors as well, just to make sure that I am reading from a diverse amount of authors. But this is probably me overthinking it too much, but going that much into things felt a little bit invasive. I know it shouldn't be, but it just felt weird Googling, especially for authors that don't have as much of a internet presence, trying to figure out all of those things just to write something down on like a spreadsheet seemed a little weird. So I will say, just off the top of my head, I have been doing really great at that. BookTube is wonderful for that. Just promoting a bunch of different authors from different ethnicities, sexualities, all across the board there. So if I was tracking it, I mean, I'm sure there are definitely biases, but I have been reading more diversely. Like I mentioned, I probably could do a little bit better with non-binary authors, because right now I've only read from 2 non-binary authors, Sarah Gailey and Rivers Solomon. The biggest thing for me that I do try and like balance is I never want to pick up a book because it checks off a box. For example, I don't want to pick up a book because the author is X race or ethnicity or sexual orientation. So don't want to do that, because I feel like that way I'm just going to pick up books that I'm not actually interested in, and I'm just like trying to get diversity points. At the same time, I do want to pick up books with a variety of different voices, because I mean, that's like part of the point of reading, is experiencing different things, reading from different voices, living 1,000 different lives in one life. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm feeling pretty good about these stats. It'll be interesting to see kind of where I am at the end of this year. I anticipate probably the biggest difference will be in terms of that genre. I feel like that one is the one that is the most likely to change, just based on my moods at any given month. Like I said, fantasy and horror is always up there, but I really haven't been in the mood for thrillers for a couple months now, so that's probably going to stay the same, if not raised just a little bit. There are a lot of anticipated sci-fis that I've been wanting to read this year, so that might raise a little bit. And honestly, I have been prioritizing a lot of fantasy books over horror, so that might take the place as my top genre. Also, just looking at the age range, it's probably going to be primarily adult, but I mean, I feel like the YA might get a little bit bigger there as well. But that is going to be the end of this video. That's going to be all my stats for the mid-year marker. It's going to be really fun comparing this to my stats at the end of the year. So that is going to be it for me. If you liked this video, please be sure to leave a comment down below, give it a like, subscribe for more content from me, and I will catch y'all in my next video. Bye!